Andrew Arthur is a Maryland resident. He's also a former immigration judge and a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies, and he joins us tonight. Andrew, thanks very much for coming on. So, as someone who's spent your life in Maryland and has spent a career involved in immigration policy, were you surprised to see the fruit of this policy?
Absolutely not. The Attorney General of Maryland, Brian Frosh, is a person who has filed 14 different lawsuits against President Trump. Not surprisingly, his immigration stance is in line with the lawsuits that he's filed. He's made it clear to local law enforcement that ICE detainers are voluntary and that they risk potential liability if they comply with them. He does everything but tell them not to. And then in my hometown of Baltimore, which you see behind me, Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney, has actually recommended to prosecutors that they consider unlawful status when charging people because they don't want to have people inadvertently deported simply because they're criminals.
So when people get murdered as a result, do the policymakers you just mentioned stop, think through what just happened and why, and reassess their positions? Do they feel guilt or shame? Do they change?
No. In fact, this is not a new phenomenon in Maryland, in Northern Virginia either. I mean, we've had an MS-13 problem in these states for the last number of years, ever since we saw a huge influx of unaccompanied alien children, if you would, and that's anybody under the age of 18, come into the United States. At the end of the Bush administration, MS-13 as a force was almost spent in the United States, which was good for the United States and good for El Salvador because it deprived the gang of money that they used to carry out their heinous acts down there. But as we've seen this flood of unaccompanied alien children, we've started to see the gang become more prevalent. In fact, there was a horrible case. I was one of the few people to write about it in Kensington, Maryland, 12 miles from the White House, in which an underage sex-trafficked prostitute was beaten with a baseball bat more than 20 times simply because she did not provide, she didn't do her job well enough for the gang. But none of this actually makes any difference to the people who are in charge of the law in the state of Maryland. Governor Larry Hogan, I think, would probably, love to take action, but unfortunately, law in the state of Maryland is in the hands of Brian Frosh, a Democrat Attorney General.
What's odd in the specific case of MS-13 is virtually all of their victims are also Salvadoran immigrants or Guatemalan immigrants. So it's not like there's no racial component here at all. The people suffering are the people that the left claims to stand for and protect. It doesn't make any sense.
No, and whenever you hear Tucker people talk about sanctuary policies, the argument is always made that they're implemented in order to protect immigrant communities. But most of these crimes take place in immigrant communities, and when released from jail, as these two individuals were, Escobar and Fuentes Ponce, they go back to those communities and they commit even more crimes, which is exactly what happened here. They were arrested for attempted murder and gang-related activities. Escobar got 10 months in juvenile facility for a conspiracy to commit murder, and then he was released. We don't even know what happened to Fuentes Ponce, who, by the way, is actually in the United States illegally. He's under a final order of removal. The family that he came to the United States with never showed up for court. So neither of these gentlemen should have been in the United States to commit any crime whatsoever. They shouldn't have been in the United States to begin with, but they certainly shouldn't have been in the United States to commit any crime, certainly not one as heinous as this. And unfortunately, the machete is the weapon of choice of MS-13.
It's disgusting. Well, I'd like to follow up on this story as we learn more. I hope you'll come back. Andrew, thanks very much for that. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, officially, Nancy Pelosi is merely the Speaker of the House and the most powerful elected Democrat, but she's more than that. She's becoming the high